Good morning and welcome to Mass Memorial Virtual Sunday School. Before we begin, I'd just like to take a few moments of silence for the families in Buffalo and the families in Uvalde, Texas. Just a few minutes. The theme for the quarter, God frees and redeems. We're finally in the last lesson of Unit 3, which is Liberating Letters. Today's lesson for Sunday, May 29, 2022. The spiritual fruit of freedom. The scripture text, Galatians 5, 16 through 26. Our key verse, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Galatians 5, 25 from the King James Version. The aim for this lesson is to explore the freedoms gained when walking by the Spirit. Desire the personal and relational qualities of a Spirit-led life, and to support one another in living a life centered on Jesus Christ. A little bit of the lesson background we probably have gone over in the past two lessons, but we're still around AD 48. And Paul is still writing these letters from Syrian Antioch. And Galatia is a Roman province, as we said before, that contains cities like Lystra, Deborah, and Iconium. And it is known as present-day Turkey. And these particular letters were written on Paul's first journey. And the book of Galatians deal with freedom from the law and justification by grace through the Holy Spirit. We talk about Gentiles, we mentioned before, anyone who is not Jewish, and one who does not adhere to Jewish laws and customs. Another point that we will add to this background is the early church's identity. The Roman government viewed the first century Christianity as a sect of Judaism because the church was still searching for its identity. The first believers did not call themselves Christians, but followers of the way. And the actual name Christians was first used in the city of Antioch. That comes from Acts 11th chapter. Another item that I don't have mentioned is fruit. And we all think of fruit as something we see, we go to the grocery store and buy. But it's mentioned throughout this lesson. And this fruit has reference to, as we define it in our lesson, we know that we don't often recognize fruit until it's planted and start to produce, which is a symbol of knowing the power of the Spirit at work in our lives. We produce the fruit according to what's within us. And so this lesson deals with the fruit of the Spirit, not plural, and the fruits of the flesh. When we use fruit in relation to the Holy Spirit, we're talking about one Spirit. That's the Holy Spirit. And the fruits of the flesh are many. The works of the flesh, we get into our scriptures, Galatians 5, 16 through 21. And I'll read Galatians 5, 16 through 5, 18. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Galatians 5, 17. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary to the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would do. Galatians 5:18. But if ye be led of the Spirit, ye are not under the law. And here again, Paul is making reference to the law, what the law could not do. Paul here is trying to defend Christian freedom in our daily living. And last Sunday we talked about the nature of Christian freedom. So this lesson deals with the nature of Christian freedom as it relates to our daily lives. And when Paul mentioned walk in the Spirit, this has reference to a way of life, a choice. Walking in the Spirit removes us from the destructive influence of our sinful nature. And we can only do that if we have accepted the Holy Spirit and allow it to lead us in our lives. Christian life begins with the Holy Spirit. And when Paul says, if we have this Holy Spirit, we tend to not be able to fulfill the lust of the flesh. In verse 17, he talks about the flesh against the spirit. This basically is a war going on. It's a war between our minds and bodies, in which our minds and bodies are the battlegrounds. And so Paul is constantly saying that we as believers must be regulated by inner control of the Holy Spirit, which produces godly behavior, something that the law could not do. He's constantly saying to these Christians at Galactica that you must be led from within by the Holy Spirit. And remember last Sunday's lesson, he said, if the law could save you, there would be no need. God would not have to have given his only son to have us return to him in a relationship. And he finishes these 3 verses by saying, if you are in the Holy Spirit, you're not of the law. And believers, one thing we have to remember, believers struggle with sin even though we desire to honor Christ. But we are not above the struggles. And one thing that makes this difficult for Christians is that we are afraid to admit that we have struggles, because we feel like if a person is a saint and have claimed Christ as their Savior, they don't have problems. That's not true. The flesh is always at war with the Holy Spirit, no matter what. And so, in order to overcome the law and overcome the flesh, you must be led by the Holy Spirit. Verses 19 through 21, continuing with the works of the flesh. Now the works of the flesh are manifest. Which are these? Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness. Galatians 5:20, adultery, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, and heresies. And Galatians 5:21, envying, murders, drunkenness, reveling, and such as like, of which I tell you before, as I have also told you in the past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. Basically, all Paul is doing here is listing some of the characteristics of the works of the flesh. And just for general understanding, I'm going to kind of define some of these according to the way they were defined in Paul's days. Some of them have changed. When we look at adultery, that is a relationship, an illicit relationship involving one or more married people. And the word fornication, which originally had reference to prostitution in the Old Testament, but it is any relationship, both homosexuality and premarital sex, that you have. And so this has also taken on different meanings in our day. We see it a little differently, especially when it comes to homosexuality. It's been included. And so when we talk about uncleanliness, this means moral impurity. And it has reference to your thoughts. And the Old Testament says, anyone that has unclean thoughts are unfit to come before God. And this is the part often, we think of uncleanliness as a physical uncleanliness. But Paul had reference to a spiritual uncleanliness. This is what we can't see in an individual. Only God can see this. We don't know what another person's thoughts are until they begin to manifest them physically. So you can have unclean thoughts, impure thoughts, and this is a sin. I think there's a verse in the Bible that says we sin by thought, word, and deed. And we often say, well, I'm not guilty of that, but we are. We make decisions about people without even knowing them. So this becomes a way of having unclean thoughts. And so we talked about, the other one is lasciviousness. I'm probably not pronouncing it quite right. But it has anything to do with something that causes evil desires or excitement within us. And oftentimes this could come through television, it could come through pornography, it could come through immoral acts. But if it causes an evil excitement in you, it's considered a sin. Some of the other things that Paul listed: adultery, witchcraft. Adultery is the worshiping of false gods. And this does not have to, we think of it oftentimes as pagan gods, but this could be our car, it could be our house, it could be our children. Anything that we put before God and we worship and we serve it can be considered adultery. The other thing is that Paul talks about is witchcraft. And we see that in our day and age too: magic, dealing with demons, using drugs to induce mental excitement, or things that would not normally occur if you were not under influence of drugs. And so these are all things that we see in our present day and age, not just during Paul's time. And the other one is hatred. This has become so dominant in our society. Hatred is animosity toward others. And it can deal with for whatever reason, because their color, because their status, because they look better than us, because they have achieved better than us. Animosity that dwells deep within a person. And we know when hatred is indwelled, oftentimes people act on that hatred, as we have seen the last 2 weeks with Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas. Something else that Paul mentioned that we don't really think about very much, and that's variance. And this is very prevalent in our society. And this means keeping strife going, a fondness for arguing. You know, there are some people, I say, who will argue with themselves if they had the opportunity to. But this is called variance. They like to pick fights, they like to argue, they like to keep, what we call it, stuff going. This is called variance. And this is one that can get away from us, because oftentimes we keep it going by just a small word, just a small deed, just an attitude. You keep things going. And so we don't really think about this, I don't think, as being wrong, but it is considered a sin if you keep things ongoing. And another word that Paul uses is emulations. And this is thinking more of ourselves than we ought. It could be our own selfishness, our own jealousy toward others. And we do see this often. If somebody gets a bigger car than us, and you know, sometimes neighbors do that. They keep up, if they see somebody making improvements, then the next thing you know, they're making the same improvement or doing something that's better than what the other person has done. Strife is to continue to keep things going. It also can be a form of variance. And we look at sedition, which means that we keep dissension going. We like to see things split. We don't want to see organizations come together. This was a problem with most of the churches that Paul started, even at Corinth, at Galatia. They were falling apart from within. There was so much going on within the church that Paul felt that they would fall apart within because people just kept things going. This is called sedition. And the last thing that Paul mentioned is heresy. And believe it or not, we don't call things heresy in our day, but the prevalence of it is very recognizable. And heresy is any false belief that are spread that causes destructive functions, and it results in distraction and dissension. And we think of this as items like false, let's say the election. We know how the election went, but there are people who fail to admit that it is what it is. So they have the idea that the election was not correct. Some of these other theories, replacement theories, people have these, I call it crazy ideas about somebody's going to, eventually all mankind is going to be replaced with a new population. If you look at what God had to do in the wilderness, he had to replace all the old people because of what they had failed to do. So we all are going to be replaced if you really want to look at it like that. But here in our day and age, they're using it to keep dissension going, to keep sedition going, and it is heresy because it's not totally truth-based, has no truth in terms of Christianity. In our next part, Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Now, the items I just went over are works of the flesh. Works, which means that we do these things, they become, and it is a task, it's a job. And so these are things that occur because of our lustfulness in the flesh and because of the war that's going on between our minds and bodies and works of the flesh, between the flesh and the Holy Spirit. Paul mentioned in several scriptures that people who do some of these works of the flesh are not lost. But anyone whose life is characterized by such may be lost, which means that if you let it become a part of you, if you let it become indwelled in you so that the Holy Spirit cannot operate within you, then you will be lost. I mean, there's basically no hope, no peace, no joy, because you have allowed these works of the flesh to become a part of your character, a part of your lifestyle. The next few scriptures, Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Now, when we talk about the works of the flesh, that's several things. But here, fruit is not plural, it's singular, because the fruit is a result of what happens when the Holy Spirit is indwelled within an individual. And there can only be one Holy Spirit. That's why it's called the fruit of the Spirit. And so, in this case, fruit is not looked upon as works, but as virtues. And we know virtues must come from the Holy Spirit, according to Paul, writing to the people at Galatia. So Galatians 5:22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith. Galatians 5:23. Meekness, temperance, against such there is no law. Galatians 5:24. And they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. So here he's listing out the virtues of being led by the Holy Spirit. And some of these we tend to take as weaknesses. So when we look at the fruit of the Holy Spirit, the first one listed is love. Love is the most powerful emotion there is. And we know that because of what God did for mankind. He gave his only son so that we could, in our sinful nature, come back to him. So the greatest of these fruit is love. And when we talk about joy, there's a difference. You know, people say joy and happiness. No, there's a difference between joy and happiness. Joy is a product of the Holy Spirit, and you can have joy no matter what your situation is, even if things are dire. To have joy must come from the Holy Spirit. Happiness depends on your circumstances. And if you think about it, there is a difference. Because if somebody, look at the people in Texas, happiness is not there temporarily because of the circumstances that they have endured. But it doesn't mean that joy is not there. Joy is deep within, and joy comes from the Holy Spirit. When we talk about peace, that's another characteristic that comes from the Holy Spirit. And peace enables us to deal with the situation. And peace also leads to long-suffering. Long-suffering has to do with patience. And I, myself, am a little short on patience at times, a lot of time. And patience just means putting up with others, even when we are provoked or we face opposition from our opponents. This one really is a war between the Holy Spirit and the flesh, because we know when somebody do something to us, we don't want to forget it. It's a difficult one to get under control, and we can't do it by ourselves. We have to do it with the Holy Spirit. And when we talk about long-suffering just means that you are able to put these events behind you. You might feel like, well, when is this going to end? It will end. And that's basically what Paul said. This is a product of the Holy Spirit. It allows you to deal with whatever situation that you come upon. Gentleness, goodness, and faith. Gentleness is your kindness toward other people. And goodness is how well you treat other people. And usually our faith in the Holy Spirit, not the law. That's what Paul was trying to tell them. All these things are a result of the new seed, which is Jesus Christ. And as we become and dwell with the Holy Spirit, it becomes a little bit easier for us to take on these characteristics. Other things that Paul mentioned is meekness, temperance. And here again, he's saying the law can't keep you meek. Meekness is humility and humbleness. And people look at this as a weak characteristic. But it takes a lot to be humble and have humility in the face of many situations. You know, when people are saying bad things to you in your face, it takes a lot to deal with that. And it's very difficult to do unless you are led by the Holy Spirit. Temperance means self-control and to abstain from those things that are habit forming: alcohol, drugs, gossiping, envying. So here again, these are not things that we can really handle without the Holy Spirit. And Paul mentions that it's hard to find fault with the fruit of the Holy Spirit. Who can find fault with love, joy, and peace? Of course, there are some individuals who are not being led by the Holy Spirit that can find fault of anything. But is it difficult according to the law? And Paul was concerned because the Jews based everything on the law. And he said, the law should no longer hold power over you when you become led by the Holy Spirit. And occasionally, Paul says that we do sin, but through faith, we can make spiritual progress. And that's basically what it's all. It does not mean that we're not going to have hard times, and it does not mean we're not going to sin. But it's through faith that we're able to come back, that we don't let these things of the flesh become indwelled and instilled in us to the point that the Holy Spirit can't dwell there. If you know, when people talk about light and darkness cannot occupy the same space. So you're going to have one or the other. Your light might get a little dim, but if you have faith and you still believe in the Holy Spirit, you can eventually overcome just about anything. Our next two scriptures, final scriptures, Galatians 5:25. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Galatians 5:26. Let us not be desirous of vain glory, provoking one another, envying one another. This walk has reference to the way of life in the Holy Spirit. And it implies that we need to constantly stay in step with the Holy Spirit. Because it's like in a band, once you get out of step, you throw everybody off. And when you're out of step with the Holy Spirit, you take on some of these characteristics or works of the flesh. And everything gets out of whack, out of sync, because you are not walking in the Spirit. And finally, one of these things that we see on a daily basis, Paul said, let us not be desirous of vain glory, provoking one another, envying one another. This has to do with a conceited heart, persons who seek glory for themselves. It's all about I, never me, we, they. Provoking means to challenge, to openly challenge somebody to another fight or to another argument or to another way of life. And sometimes you can do that just with one word, with a look, with an attitude. You don't have to just verbally come out and say something to provoke someone. And in this day and age, I guess sometimes you look at people and say, well, I can't stand that person, I don't like that. But you don't know why, but that's what this means. Vain glory and provoking people to wrath. And envying, which is it means being jealous of another person's talents or achievements and the honors they receive. You know, some people don't want anybody receiving more honors than they do. But there's a reason for that. And you're so tied up in yourself, you can't see that the other person has something to offer. Everyone has something to offer. They might not be at your level, but they have something to offer. And some of us are so conceited and vain that, well, why are they getting the Nobel Prize? They didn't do anything. But there's things that you don't know. There's things that, many people do service and community projects, and we don't know about that. We think they just sitting home watching the stories all day when they be out on the soup line serving people or out trying to help those in the community that are homeless. We don't know what brings on these recognition. So we become envious, and we just figure, we envy people even, well, they should do more. We don't know what they're doing, so we need to be cautious about how we look at that. And Paul says this vainglory can slip upon us before we even recognize that it's there. And if you don't believe that, check your comments sometimes about other people. It's there. So, in terms of our practical application, this whole unit has talked about freedom and how Christ came to redeem us and make us free. And so this lesson challenges us to live a spirit-filled life, which means that we must be constantly informed by the scriptures and submit to the Holy Spirit. And sometimes to be informed by the scriptures can be misleading. It can be difficult to understand. And this is when we must go in prayer to ask for guidance from the Holy Spirit, because some things we don't always understand. And the book of Galatians, for the average reader, can be rather difficult to understand because we don't look at the context in which Paul was saying these things. And so he reminded the church at Galatia that the flesh is always at war with the fruit of the Spirit, and the flesh always desires to do what is contrary to the Holy Spirit. And that's why we say it's a war between good and evil. And it's a war between flesh and the desires of the Holy Spirit. Anything contrary to the Holy Spirit can lead us astray, can take us off that path that we should be walking on. The other thing Paul addressed with the church at Galatia, because they had so many teachers, they had false teachers, they had people that were trying to destroy the church from within. And some of them had even gotten to the point they started to categorize sin. It's small and large, we do it too. They'll say, well, stealing a candy bar from the store is not like stealing a car. There's no difference. Candy bar might be smaller, the car might be bigger, but the sin is theft. And so it's the same. There's no large sins, there's no small sins. And so we see this has come down from the beginning of time. People like to categorize things, Well, I did it this way. It doesn't make it right. Well, they did it that way. It doesn't make it wrong. And so we need to look at things when we start to categorize sin. Sin is sin no matter what act is committed, small or large. The lesson, this unit basically deals with freedom, and freedom by adhering to the fruit of the Spirit is not easy because we have become accustomed to reacting without thinking about the fruit of the Spirit. And this often leads us to do things our way without consideration of the neighbor. It's like somebody having a big street party and the band going all night, but they didn't ask the neighbors, would it be okay? Just a common courtesy. So we get so accustomed to reacting that we can't talk to our neighbor, we can't talk to our church member. Conversation has become null and void. And I think some of that is due to the fact that people text. Texting is not a way of communication. It might get you an answer instantly, but there's nothing like hearing the human voice. And we need to be more considerate of our neighbors. And finally, admitting our flaws and weaknesses in the flesh should help us realize what we need to do to get back to doing things according to the fruit of the Spirit. And this is not an easy task, especially for those who think they're already leading a walk of life in the Holy Spirit. And I think oftentimes these are the people that get really led astray because they can't see just the small things that will take you off of that walk. The small things, the small attitude toward a church member, the small attitude toward your neighbor. You're already out of sync, but you don't realize it because you're saying, well, I'm this big time Christian. There's no big time Christian, no little Christian. If you're all in the walk of life, the Holy Spirit, you're all Christians. But then again, you can stray from the path. It's not easy to stay on the path. And oftentimes, if you on a long trip, if you take your eye off of what you're supposed to be doing, you'll end up 10 miles out of the way, or you'll miss your turn and then have to go back. So just the blink of an eye can take you off the right path. And with that, as we move throughout our daily routine, let us become more mindful of the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. Just keep these things in mind. And remember, love is the most powerful of all of these. And if we have love in our heart and we are guided by the Holy Spirit, then overcoming the work of the flesh is a battle that we can win. It won't be easy, but we can win the battle and we can win the war. So with that, I hope you've gotten something out of these 3 books of Galatians as it relates to freedom from the law and how the Holy Spirit has come to replace the law, how Christ came to fulfill the law and to replace the law and to do what the law could not do. So let's just keep these characteristics in mind as we go throughout our week and think about the other person, put ourselves in that person's position sometime, and that will help us to be better towards that person and to make their lives better, just with a kind word. So please continue to follow us in our virtual Sunday school lessons, and I hope you have gotten something from this lesson. Thank you.